Hello and welcome to the Tudors Dynasty podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Larson. And today I want to share with you my visit to Sudeley Castle. This was one of those places when I went to England that was top of my list because, of course, Thomas Seymour owned Sudeley Castle, and it's also where Kateryn Parr died and was buried. So I took a tour around the grounds, even went inside the chapel, and I have some stories to tell you about my visit. I hope you enjoy.
The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.
Here I am at the ruins. Everybody knows this as King Richard III ruins. However, if you look at it, this is actually the presence chamber of Queen Kateryn Parr. On the top floor there, you see the windows. Those are huge windows. They went from floor to ceiling, and you can kind of imagine where the floor was. And in the middle, you have the fireplace. You can just imagine Kateryn sitting there by the fire. And looking out the windows, she would see the gardens. And then if you go over into the corner where you see the bird in the doorway, that is how they would go down to the gardens, is through that doorway. So she could sneak down the little staircase there to head into the gardens. But what an amazing place for Kateryn to be able to spend. Sadly, she didn't get to spend very much time here. Wow, imagine her walking out and looking at this beautiful garden behind us. I just feel like I'm walking in the footsteps of Kateryn Parr today. I thought I'd feel more like Thomas Seymour, but it's definitely more of a Kateryn day today. This place is stunning, peaceful. All right, behind me, you will see the Queen's Gardens. And you'll also see the windows where Kateryn Parr would have looked out over the gardens. Now, I can imagine she and Thomas had written letters to one another. And in one of the letters, Thomas mentioned to Kateryn about how she needed to make sure to stay fit so that their baby was lean and would easily slip out of her. Well, I imagine this is one of the gardens that she would have walked through, possibly with Lady Jane Grey. It's so peaceful here. I don't even know how to describe the peacefulness I feel at this location. It's more than I imagined, and I'm so happy to be here. Okay, here we are at the chapel at Sudeley Castle. This is where Kateryn Parr is buried. And I've been waiting many, many years to go inside to see her tomb and to be on these grounds here at Sudeley Castle.
Let's briefly discuss what happened to Kateryn Parr's body after her death. Some of these accounts seem so outrageous that they could easily be mistaken for fiction. But unfortunately, they are said to be grounded in fact, supported by eyewitness accounts. Kateryn Parr died on the 5th of September, 1548, and was buried 2 days later at the chapel on the grounds of Sudeley Castle. Following Thomas Seymour's execution, Sudeley Castle reverted to the crown under Edward VI. And over the next century, the estate changed hands multiple times, eventually falling into neglect. Kateryn Parr's burial site deteriorated, becoming so dilapidated that one would never guess a former queen consort of England had been laid to rest there. In 1782, a local resident named John Lucas discovered Parr's tomb. Shockingly, he decided to pry open the coffin, making a small incision in the wax cloth that encased her body. To his amazement, Lucas reported that after 248 years, her skin remained white and moist. He proceeded to peel back more of the wax cloth and claimed that Parr appeared remarkably well preserved. Then, in an act of utter disrespect, he clipped off a lock of hair, a piece of her dress, and even took one of her teeth. Word of this discovery spread quickly, and a year later, more curious individuals came to view the Queen's remains. By then, her exposed skin had begun to decompose, thanks to Lucas's tampering. No further desecration occurred during this visit, and a stone slab was placed over the grave to prevent additional vandalism. Yet once again, a year later, more people came to gawk at the Queen's remains. This time, it's said that they removed her body from the coffin and discarded it on a pile of rubbish. Thankfully, the parish vicar stepped in to have her remains reinterred. 2 years later, Reverend Nash conducted a so-called scientific exhumation of the Queen's remains. By then, Kateryn's face had totally decayed, though her teeth were still intact, albeit dislodged, and her hands and nails were entire, but of brownish hue. Nash lamented that the poor queen should have been left to rest in peace, but his words went unheeded. Kateryn Parr's coffin would be opened several more times toward the end of the 18th century. Agnes Strickland, a historian notorious for sensationalizing history, later reported further disturbing details, but will refrain from repeating them here. In 1817, Kateryn's tomb was disinterred for the final time. Her coffin moved to the vault of the Chandos family. Fortunately, by the mid-19th century, St. Mary's Chapel at Sudeley was restored, and Kateryn Parr was finally allowed to rest undisturbed. And that is where she lies today.
Okay, here I am at St. Mary's Chapel on the grounds of Sudeley Castle. As many of you know, I've been researching Kateryn Parr and Thomas Seymour for quite a long time, so being here is a big deal for me at the tomb of Kateryn Parr. Now we know this wasn't originally the same church, it was a different church, and we've heard all the horrible stories about what happened to her body. But I have to tell you, there's something quite calming and peaceful about being standing right next to her tomb here. And it's exquisite. It's absolutely breathtaking. This whole place, I could just feel it. I feel very honored to be here today.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Tudors Dynasty podcast. If you love the show and would like to show your support, please head on over to my Patreon page. That's Patreon, patreon.com/Tudors Dynasty for more information. Over there, you're going to find commercial-free episodes. You'll get early access, and there's some exclusive content as well, with more stuff to come as I'm rebuilding it. Also, recently I returned from England and cannot wait to go back. But this time I would love to bring you with me. So if you're interested to go on a tour of England with me, why don't you send me an email, Rebecca@tudorsdynasty.com for more information. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.